Good morning, everybody. I hope this morning finds the watching world doing okay and staying healthy during these pretty difficult times. And please know that the team at Grace is thinking of you all and doing what we can to try to ease up life for a number of you as you struggle through a time that none of us have really been through before. And one of those ways is to just stay connected with you all. And that's why I am so excited about this morning's conversation. My name is Boz Tchividjian. I'm the Executive Director of Grace for only a few more weeks because we are going to have a new Executive Director. And that's the purpose of today's conversation. I am so excited to be able to engage in a conversation with a man who has quickly become a good friend of mine and somebody that I've quickly learned to admire and look up to. And his name is Pete Singer. And you're going to hear a lot more about Pete in the coming 30 minutes and in the coming years as he moves Grace into its next chapter of life. But before we get into that conversation, I just wanted to help encourage you all to learn more about what's going on in the life of Grace, especially in our Growing Grace campaign. Our Growing Grace campaign started a few weeks ago, and its purpose is to grow grace because of the need, the incredible need that we keep getting, keep receiving, especially even now during this pandemic, from churches and individuals. It's becoming critically important that we grow our team. And in order to grow our team, that takes additional resources. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the Growing Grace campaign towards the end of our conversation. But I just wanted to plant it in your head so you could begin thinking about it. And we'll be putting the link for the Growing Grace campaign on the page and on the screen so that you all can click it and learn a little bit more about it after we're finished. Because right now, I want to talk about something that is, as I said, is very exciting. And I want to introduce this morning to you all Pete Singer. Pete, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled.
Well, Pete, tell us, I'm sitting outside in Florida. There's green. You can see all the green behind me. I almost wore short sleeves, but I didn't want to rub it in too much. But you're not sitting outside. And why aren't you sitting outside this morning?
I'm not sitting outside because even though we are expected to be balmy today in the 30s, Minnesota is just not quite so warm as Florida, at least not in the winter. So I'm in Minnesota, chillier, uh, for sure, chillier. But
Well,
we get green in the summer.
I can tell you though, my guess is Florida's probably a little bit crazier. We might be warmer, but we're a little crazier than Minnesota. At least, I'll at least suggest that to help you out.
And we also have beautiful fall colors.
Well, listen, I guess we just get started with just telling us a little bit about who you are. I mean, tell us about Pete Singer. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What have you been doing prior to your arrival at Grace?
So I was born back in 1970 in Minnesota, and I've spent most of my life in Minnesota. I spent a couple of years in Ohio going to college, and also spent a year living in Florida early on in my wife's and my marriage. I've been married for since 1991, and we actually met in seventh grade. Didn't start dating until we were seniors in high school, but we met in seventh grade.
Pretty cool.
We have three kids. Our oldest, Andrew, is married to Kelsey, and they have a son, Jesse. And then our second, Cassie, is married to Eric, and they just got married this summer in the middle of a pandemic.
Wow.
And then our youngest, Emily, is in 11th grade, splitting her time between high school and college classes, and quickly rising up the ladder of fame on the internet as she is now over 19,000 followers. And so she's pretty
She's a
excited.
social influencer?
She's getting there. She said that she needs to be at 30,000 followers before she can be considered an influencer. But we were having a conversation about this last night, and in September is when she hit 10,000. So since September, she's increased. She's almost doubled her followers, and so
Wow.
yeah, so she's up and coming, and boy, it's just a great outlet for her creativity, and so that's been cool.
Yeah. So tell us your background. My background is as a lawyer. Your background is not as a lawyer. What's your background?
So I've been doing a few things. My primary background is that I'm a therapist. I'm a clinical social worker. And with that clinical social work perspective, a lot of the work that I do is focused on a person, but also the environment around that person, really looking at it from an environmental perspective. And with that, my practice has focused primarily on kids who've experienced trauma, mostly child maltreatment, but other forms of trauma as well, traumatic grief and loss, medical trauma, in just a couple of instances, kids that have been held in captivity for varying lengths of time. And so that's been the focus of my clinical practice, and then also adult survivors of childhood trauma. In addition to that, I do a lot of training and organizational consultation around trauma-informed practices. How can we as organizations actually pay attention to the fact that trauma is real, that trauma is incredibly prevalent, and that it impacts so many people within our spheres, and that when we recognize that, that gives us a responsibility. We have to do something about that. And so working with organizations to understand that and to planfully move forward. And how do we deal with the fact that many of the people getting services from us, whether it's in healthcare or education or mental health or advocacy, whatever it might be, so many people have experienced trauma, and how do we handle our responsibility to respond to that ethically, and with compassion and love and respect. Yeah. And then in addition to that, back in 2005, so right around the same time that Grace started, I started a nonprofit here in Minnesota called Care in Action Minnesota. And Care in Action Minnesota has some overlap with Grace, just as far as the focus on the faith community. A lot of the work that we do is with the faith community, working to build their capacity to recognize, respond to, and prevent child maltreatment. And we do that in a number of ways. A lot of what we do is establishing partnerships between community organizations, again, with that focus on the faith community, and child protection systems. And then when those workers have needs on their caseload that they can't meet, they contact their community partner, and the community partner helps meet that need. And that could be anything from rent, utilities, to dance lessons or gymnastics lessons, so that parents can connect or reconnect, a dinner table so that a family can eat together. And so, yeah, lots of those types of things. And then we do community education related to that as well, talking to churches or other faith communities about child maltreatment and how they can respond. We do a lot of work in connection with Victor Veith and the Zero Abuse Project. Victor Veith is on the board, and then also the Zero Abuse Project in doing training, such as the Keeping Faith training that's coming up next week.
Well, I mean, I know you have a real heart. Just this became very clear during the interview process. And let me just say as a side, you know, identifying the next executive director was quite a process for us. And I would say first and foremost, Pete, you had a unanimous support from the board I think almost from the moment we started speaking with you, it became growingly clear that you would be the perfect fit. But having said that, I'll also say for me personally, it was amazing to, you know, an organization I helped start back in 2004, knowing that I'm going to step aside and putting that out there and requesting those who might be interested in maybe taking the lead of this organization to apply. I honestly, I wasn't sure if we would get any applicants. And I was just so encouraged by the fact that we had people from all over the country, some amazingly qualified people who went through this process because they had a desire to drop what they're doing and lead this organization. And for me personally, hugely encouraging. But when you stepped on the scene, it was very clear to me pretty early on that you're the right fit for Grace at such a time as this.
Wow.
And as you think through your life and you think through the passion you have for vulnerable and hurting people, especially in connection with the church, can you point to any type of life experience that you think, as you look back, drove you in that direction?
Yeah, I think I have a friend who's a children's mental health worker in a county here, and we were talking kind of early on in our friendship, and she said to me, Pete, what brought you here?
Mm,
We all have something that brought us here. And there's a lot of wisdom to that. And so, like many of us that are passionate about this, something has brought us here. For me, that started really in elementary school as I grew up in a fairly abusive faith community, a fairly abusive church and Christian school. And I was definitely fortunate in that it did not directly impact me as much as it directly impacted many, many people. But there was significant abuse of all types that even ended up resulting, because of the culture and beliefs and practices that really were engendered and empowered by that faith community, resulted in a couple of deaths. And so that was a pretty intense thing. And I remember afterwards when we visited with the family where the deaths had occurred, as we were leaving, my mom said to me, "This happened because the church and child protection don't work together."
mm,
And that just stuck there. Because if the people in that church had gone through the safeguarding program, for example, what ended up happening would not have had to have happened. If following up on previous incidents, something like a Grace investigation had occurred in that church, it potentially could have stopped the chain of events that led to those deaths. And so that has created a passion for the type of work that Grace does, bridging this gap and raising awareness within the faith community, within churches and ministries. We can't turn a blind eye. We need to do our due diligence. We need to equip ourselves to prevent this from happening. And when it does, there needs to be accountability and there needs to be growth. When it happens, how do we respond?
yeah.
How do we grow? How do we deal with the survivors who have been hurt? I think we see again and again in the life of Christ and throughout Scripture this focus on the vulnerable, the focus on those who've been hurt. In the book of Isaiah, God doesn't just say, hey, you need to help take care of people who have been hurt, people who are in need. He goes so far as to say, if you don't, you are choosing to be my enemy.
Mm, mm,
And to think of the church choosing to be the enemy of God, that is not something that I think God wants for his bride. So the church has a higher calling than that. And I'm passionate about trying to help and equip the church to fulfill this calling that I do believe God has placed on us.
Well, as I think about you and as I'm getting to know you and I'm getting to know your personality and your gifts, the more confident I have become in knowing that you're the right person to lead this organization into the sort of the next chapter. I think everybody brings something to the table in certain gift sets, and I think I'm not sure if I do, but I think I have a few gift sets that help start these things going. But
Just a few.
But well, yeah, we'll debate that later. But as we move forward, there are a lot of those things that I think are needed in the life of the organization, that the things that are needed aren't necessarily the gift sets that I have, which is one of the reasons, which we can talk about in a little bit, why I made the decision that it was time for me to step down. As you think about your own self and your own professional experience, your own personality, your own interests, how do you see your gift set and your personality fitting in as the leader of Grace? And how do you see, and maybe this probably knowing you make you feel a little uncomfortable, but how do you see that contributing as Grace continues to move forward into the dark places of the church?
Sure. I see a little bit of a disturbing trend in my life. And as I really started getting into mental health, I made the conscious decision that I would not work with abused kids. And that didn't work out. And I think back to a conversation that I had with somebody who was in upper management at the organization where I was a therapist at the time. And I was mid-level management doing supervision. And I said to that person, I'm at the spot where I want to be. I do not want to have any greater involvement with organizational management, because that is just not where I am. And it's kind of like, I don't want to work with kids who have trauma. I think God had a different plan. And so he created a pathway. And for me, a lot of that was in that position, getting to see a lot more of the organizational functioning and experience working with staff, almost often remotely. And then as I started Care in Action, getting used to the requirements of that organization, whether it would be finding and helping to figure out what is our grant strategy, what is our fundraising strategy. And then as I got into doing a lot more of the organizational consultation, looking at the policies, looking at the procedures, looking at the practices, and really doing a deep dive where organizations were really depending on my opinion of how do we establish an effective policy related to abuse? How do we establish an effective policy or an effective practice so that we can consistently handle this well? Yeah. And I think moving in that direction, which really was a direction that I didn't seek, but that I think God brought in for me, prompted that growth and a recognition and a realization that while I am always going to be passionate about individuals, I became much more aware and also passionate about the whole systemic aspect of it. And with that brought in, okay, this is how we can develop effective policies and procedures. This is how we can assess and come up with just an overall framework through which we view these things and look at these things to develop that consistency and a planful way of growth.
Well, I think that's where we are as an organization for Grace. I'm not, and I've always told our staff that, I'm not the person that gets into the weeds of figuring out how do systems work and what systems do we need and the policies within the system. And that became growingly clear when you recognize where your own weaknesses are, and to acknowledge that. Sometimes it's not so easy, but to acknowledge that and to know that there are people out there that have those gifts that actually are passionate about that And just in working with you in the last couple months, as you've been, slowly onboarding, getting ready for your January 1st debut, I've seen that, and I've been encouraged and comforted by that, knowing that, as an organization that started, we had no idea when we started in 2004 what we would do. We just thought we'd go speak at a few churches here and there, and got a different plans, and it exploded. And we have been doing the work of grace for a while, and we continue to do that, and the work continues to flood in. But one of the challenges has been that as we've been doing the work of grace, we have not been able to take the time to go, okay, but what is grace internally? What systems do we have set up that we can help facilitate our mission in a more effective and in a way that is in many ways easier for our team, rather than what we've been doing? And because it's almost like, if you're trying to, if your ship capsizes and you're just trying to stay above water, you're not learning the different types of swimming strokes, right? You're just trying to stay above water. And in some ways, I wouldn't say our ship is capsized, probably not the best illustration, but I would say there have been some days I feel that way, but we have been just trying to stay above the water because of the profound needs that keep coming our way, that oftentimes we've gone, well, we're just staying above water, but we're not swimming very effectively. And we need to learn how to do that. And we need somebody to come in to help us get to that point. And that's why I'm encouraged by that, what you just shared, because that shows to me not only somebody who gets the issue, who's passionate about it, who can get up, and I've seen you train a room full of child protection advocates who can publicly speak, can speak into it, who can be tough, but also can work on the internal mechanisms of an organization that has grown significantly in the past few years.
Oh boy. And I tell you, Boz, one of the things that has just so amazed me as I've gotten to know you, and as I've gotten to know Zane and Mike and Amy and all of the people at Grace, is just that incredible level of passion. Mm. This isn't just a job for any of them. Mm. And for the contractors that I've talked with, this isn't just a job for them either. This is something that resonates with the core of who they are. Mm. And it is so deep and so profoundly embedded in each of them. You talked about the organization kind of trying to swim as so much comes in. It's that passion that has done so much. And it's a passion that you created, that you modeled, and that you really spurred to grow in people. And that is what has propelled this organization and caused so much growth, and has really set up Grace to be the respected voice that it is.
Well, it took a village, and I've been amazed and blessed and humbled by just being just one member of that village, and it's an amazing village, and I will. This is a time for me that is bittersweet. It's much more sweet than bitter. But I look back on these last 16 years and the absolutely amazing heroes God has privileged me to encounter and get to know and to befriend, starting with our team. Like you said, it's just been they're an amazing group of human beings, and who inspire me on a daily basis. And then the survivors that I've been privileged to get to know on this journey. I have learned more about life and more about God from the amazing survivors I've been privileged to meet. And many of these survivors have walked away from God, and I get it. And quite frankly, I don't disagree with them based on what they've experienced. They have still, even in all that, whether they realize it or not, have been a hopeful reflection of God to me. And I will miss that on a daily basis. My new career in as a lawyer representing survivors, I will still have that opportunity, and I'm doing that now, and I'm really I'm excited about that. But on this level, when you're dealing with it in the capacity that I was as an executive director, there's a melancholiness of walking away from that. But like I said, there's also a much greater sweetness knowing that this organization has never been about me. It's about the people that we have been serving, and to know that an organization should survive and thrive when its founder steps aside. And I just have known too many organizations, especially in the faith world, where the founders cannot let go. And I will remain on the board, but I am letting go. I'm giving you I don't want to say the reins, but you are leading, and that helps. Like I said earlier, helps me as I step down, to step down with a great degree of peace and joy.
And I think just that's one thing that I've been so impressed with and so appreciative of with this is just the thoughtful process of choosing the next executive director, and then how do we make sure that this transition occurs well, and just the way that you've been so kind that everyone's been so kind as I've been coming on board and taking the time to get me up to speed, and that there hasn't been this sense of you're pulling it from my clenched fingers, but it's really been, let's work together to make sure that this accomplishes the work that God has in store. And that has been so much a blessing for me to see, just as I've started on this process, and is something that I am going to do my best to emulate as Karen Action goes through a similar process.
Yeah, that's true. That's those are important decisions, but again, much easier made when you know that the organization doesn't sink or swim because of one person. And unfortunately, we find that a lot in the Christian world, don't we? A lot of organizations and churches that are sinking or swimming because of one person. And I don't, I see more of them sinking, because so much faith and attention is put on that one person. And as a Christian in a faith-based organization, to place all of that on one person is really dangerous, and inviting a lot of problems, as we encounter on a regular basis at Grace.
I think so. I think we have just such an incredible example in the life of Christ. And we see in Paul's writings, Jesus was the very form of God. So he didn't think he had to grasp equality with God. Why? Because he knew who he was. And because he knew who he was, he didn't have to hold on to power. He didn't have to hold on to authority, because he just knew who he was.
Right.
And we forget that sometimes in the church. And we forget that sometimes with our leaders, and then our leaders end up, not all the time, but too often, end up abusing that power. And I'm so happy that Grace also speaks into directly the abuse that can occur and the church's response to that. But we also talk about the abuse of power in the church. I mean, even just like next month, on January 9th, when we're having the Grace conversation on abuse of power in the church, how to recognize it, how to safeguard against it. And we've got just a couple of incredible people coming on. Diane Langberg, who is known by many, many people, just such a respected clinical psychologist and author, on the board of directors with Grace. And then Phil Monroe, who used to be on the board, again, a respected psychologist and does training and education on trauma for the American Bible Society. Being able to facilitate a conversation with such skilled experts like those to come in and talk about the abuse of power in the church. And that is so important, because it's about what's going on inside. It's not about a checklist. And if we meet this checklist, then kids won't get abused.
Right.
It's about how do we intentionally grow the culture of the church to reflect Jesus,
Hmm.
and to naturally have that safety that protects kids.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, you know, as I reflect on these past years, I think about I often have come to mind the story that most people know, the story of the Good Samaritan. And I've often been amazed and encouraged by that story because it reminds me in many ways of the work and life of grace. And that is, there are so many amazing souls who are laying on the sides of the roads of our churches, inside and outside. And so many of the church folks are barely even noticing them and continuing to walk on by. And I've loved the fact that the Grace team is a team, like you said earlier, is passionate and doesn't just walk by. They notice. We move towards that wounded person, and oftentimes we get in the dirt to help them and to give them hope. And I think as we look back and people watching this, it's just not the Grace team that's God has equipped and designed to do that. It's all of us. So whether I'm a lawyer who is representing survivors in the courtroom,
Mhm.
or you're simply a coworker and you know that one of your colleagues is struggling because of either current or past abuse, what responsibility do we have as human beings to notice the hurting, to move towards them, and to do what we can with the gifts that we have to help them and give them hope. And so you know, it's not just an organizational thing. It's not just a Grace thing. In fact, I think one of the great successes that Grace can have in the coming years is to help contribute to a culture where more and more people see that as one of their responsibilities, God-given responsibilities in life, and that we're all moving towards wounded and hurting people. And when we are wounded and hurting, others are moving towards us. And I'm encouraged by that, and I'm hopeful in a world and a time that seems to lack a lot of hope. I keep encountering individuals who remind me otherwise, and the Grace team is that, and Pete, you are that for Grace, and so I am wishing you the best. I'm going to remain on the board, and I will take
Yes.
those emergency calls when necessary. But I'm going to be spending my days in the courtroom, and you will be spending your days moving this organization forward in a way that is able to serve and love even more of those people. Um, I want to do two things before we conclude. I want to ask you a question, and I want to just share a little bit about the Growing Grace campaign. As you look forward to your work with Grace, what do you see? And I know it's still early on, but what do you see for the future of Grace and its work, just in general?
Sure. Well, I think our first priority is you referenced the need to establish those systems and to strengthen that infrastructure. Grace has grown incredibly over the last couple of years. Um, Too many times I've seen organizations that outgrow their capacity, and then they just topple, and they lose the ability to provide that quality that brought them to where they are. So I think our first thing is that we make sure that we're shored up, that we have the infrastructure in place, the systems in place that can support the work that we're doing. And once that's in place, then we look at continuing those key central pieces that have really defined Grace. The safeguarding program, which does policy review, training, um, not just of church leadership, but of whole churches. And that's gets to what you were talking about. Of it's everybody, and the safeguarding program recognizes that of whole churches, and the investigation and assessment team um, that helps hold people and organizations accountable, and then also strengthening that consultation piece that we do. But then we look at how do we broaden the reach, and are there other ways that we can more effectively minister within that while also, I think, strengthening um, the way that we're able to support survivors that we encounter,
Yeah.
whether that's directly or through having a better idea of where to help them find the support that they need.
Thank you. Well, in that regard, that's a great segue into this Growing Grace campaign. Um, you know, we have a pretty small core group of team members at Grace, and you know, we contract out with a larger group, but our core group is like 4 or 5 people, and we do. I'm always amazed at the work that the organization's doing with such a small core group of people. But we are at a point, we were probably at a point, that point about a year ago, where we we have to grow that. We have to, in order to effectively carry out the mission and purpose of this organization and to effectively respond to the overwhelming needs that are coming our way, we have to grow this team. And so that's why we initiated this Growing Grace campaign, to get us to $50,000. I think this morning we're at about 17,000. We have another week or so going. Some may say you're never going to get there. I'm hopeful. I am hopeful that we will, because we have no choice. If we're going to continue moving into the lives of individuals and institutions to help transform them, we have to grow. Our team has to grow, because, you know, when you carry 300 pounds on your shoulder 24/7, that gets weary, and our team gets weary. And we have to learn how to delegate. But in order to delegate, we have to have the team power to do that. Our investigations, we are getting more requests for investigations, independent investigations, than we've ever done before. Investigations is probably the hardest work we do in so many levels. But in order to do that, we want to have the team of investigators who are equipped and trained to carry out that purpose. And, you know, if you don't have that, for years I've been telling churches, you need to get independent investigations when these things happen. And now churches and organizations are contacting us, and I don't want to say no. I don't want to say we can't do it, because we're at capacity. We need to increase our capacity. We can't be at capacity. That's not an option for us. We need to increase it. And that's why this Growing Grace campaign is so critical. And, you know, the last thing I'll say about the Growing Grace campaign is this. What I love about it is we get a lot of inquiries from people saying, what can I do other than give you money? And I'll say, and I hate saying it, but please send money. But what you can do is participate in something in the life and work of Grace. Well, the Growing Grace campaign provides that opportunity, because not only can you give, and that's great, but it allows you to create your own page where now you are asking your friends, your family, your coworkers to come to your particular page to hear why you love the work and mission of Grace, and to give to your page that ultimately gives to Grace. Some people may not even know anything about Grace, but they love you. And because you're passionate about something, they want to give to what you're asking them to give. And so they can come and read about your interest in the work and mission of Grace, and to give to us through that. So I would just encourage you all to think about it. You don't have to, even if you help raise $25, it's okay. You're participating in the life and work of Grace. So I would encourage you to go to that link that's going to be on the page. Click it, read a little bit about it. If you need even some help setting it up, let us know. But thank you so much for even considering to help us out in that way. Pete, thank you for taking the time this morning to be with us, to help others know who you are. They will definitely get to see more of Pete Singer in the coming months and years. And I'm encouraged, I'm excited, I'm happy for the future of Grace, and to know that that for such a time as this, He has brought you here. And so thank you. And like I said, I'm not sailing out into the sunset, though.
We won't let you.
I will be here, working as like I said, as an attorney representing survivors, knowing each day when I wake up that Grace is in great hands, and as God moves us in the direction He has us go. So thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, and have a happy and encouraging and hopeful holiday season. And I would just say as we said before, there are a lot of people where the holidays are not a happy time and a difficult time. Just as we were talking about the Good Samaritan a minute ago, for many of us, be aware of that on a daily basis and look for those people. And even if it's just a smile, that can make a huge difference in their life on that day. Thank you, everyone.